wounded and silent. She sat against the concrete wall, her uniform stained and her breath shallow. No one on the base knew much about her. She was just another quiet face in the crowd. But when a SEAL medic knelt down beside her and asked one simple question about her real training, the entire unit froze. You're watching the Scape, where hidden truths collide with impossible courage. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Wounded and silent. That was how the others would remember her that morning. Elena Carter, the quiet specialist no one really noticed, leaning against the cracked wall of the training ground with her arms strapped tight against her body. Dust clung to her uniform, sweat matted her hair, and yet not a sound left her lips. No cry, no complaint, no curse. Just silence. For most soldiers, falling 20 feet onto rock would have meant panic, yelling for the medic, demanding morphine. Elena only stood up, brushed the dirt from her sleeve, and muttered, "I'm fine." But everyone who saw her knew she wasn't fine. Her shoulder hung at a wrong angle, her ribs were swelling beneath her vest, and she moved like each breath was a knife. And still, she insisted on walking herself to the truck. It wasn't the first time she had surprised her unit. From the day she arrived at base, Elena had been a puzzle. She wasn't loud like the others, didn't tell stories at the chow hall, never exaggerated her background. She blended into the background like a shadow. Some thought she was timid, others thought she was strange. But when missions ran late or tempers flared, Elena was the one who stayed calm, methodical, unshaken. And that calmness was starting to scare people. Her commander noticed it during long marches. Everyone else collapsed in the mud, but Elena just sat quietly, hands folded, waiting for orders. During weapons drills, she never boasted about her scores, yet her grouping was tighter than soldiers who bragged endlessly. The whispers spread. "What's with Carter? She never cracks." Some said it was toughness. Some said it was emptiness. No one guessed the truth. She had grown up in silence, a small Ohio town where her father's rages taught her that words only made things worse. While her brothers fought or shouted back, Elena learned stillness. She hid in her room, devouring books about wars and heroes, teaching herself to disappear. Joining the army had shocked everyone. How could the quiet girl survive boot camp? But the army didn't break her. If anything, it gave her discipline that felt like home. Basic training was brutal. Drill sergeants barked until voices cracked. Recruits broke down. Some quit. Elena never raised her voice, never cried, never even flinched. She simply absorbed it, like stone against a storm. At first, the cadre ignored her. But then they noticed something strange. She completed every task, every run, every obstacle, without drama, without complaint. It wasn't flash. It was consistency. And consistency wins wars. But there was something else, something her file never explained. The way she tied ropes faster than anyone else. The way she could stay awake through endless night watches. The way she noticed things others missed, like the sound of loose gravel before a misstep, or the faint click of a faulty safety. These weren't logistic skills. They were survival skills, advanced skills, skills she wasn't supposed to know. So when the accident happened, some wondered if it was really an accident at all. The rope snapped during a simple drill. At least that's what the report would say. She had been halfway down the wall, her boots scraping stone, when the line jerked and gave way. Soldiers shouted, dust rose, and she hit the ground with a thud that made stomachs turn. Yet before anyone could rush in, Elena pushed herself upright, staggering but steady. Blood trickled from her temple. She waved them off. "Don't," she said simply, eyes hard. "Don't fuss." Later,
In the waiting room of the base hospital, she sat for hours without a sound. Around her, Marines complained about wait times, sergeants grumbled about paperwork, a private sobbed quietly into his sleeve. Elena only stared at the wall, her breathing shallow, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The nurses whispered about her. "That girl hasn't moved in 2 hours." The doctor who saw her first muttered, "Never seen pain tolerance like that." But tolerance wasn't the right word. It wasn't that she didn't feel pain, it was that she refused to show it. For Elena, silence wasn't weakness, it was armor, and she had worn it so long even her closest comrades didn't know where the soldier ended and the secret began. And that was when the CO medic walked in. The door opened, boots striking linoleum, and in stepped a man who had seen more battlefields than most would ever imagine. His insignia carried weight, his eyes measured everything. He was here only temporarily, assigned while he recovered from his own wounds. But when his gaze landed on the quiet woman sitting perfectly straight despite her injuries, something in his expression changed. He didn't see a logistics specialist. He saw something else. And with one question, simple, direct, impossible to dismiss, he would force Elena's silence to crack.
Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reeve had been through more field hospitals than he could count. He'd patched men up in Afghan caves with nothing but gauze and grit, set broken bones on the deck of helicopters that shuddered under rocket fire, and watched soldiers lie about their pain just to get back into the fight. He thought he had seen every kind of reaction to injury, until he met Elena Carter. When he entered the exam room, she was already sitting upright on the table. Her posture was military straight, chin lifted slightly, as if she were reporting for duty instead of waiting to have her shoulder examined. Her uniform was dusty, her arm bound tightly in a sling she had clearly retied herself, and her eyes gave away nothing. "Specialist Carter," he said, scanning her chart. "Repelling accident, dislocated shoulder, possible rib fractures." "Yes, Chief," she answered softly. No extra words, no excuses. Reeves studied her in silence. He had been trained not just to treat wounds, but to read people. And what he read in Elena didn't line up with the paperwork. Her file said logistics specialist, supply chains, manifests, crates. Yet her hands bore calluses from rope burns that came only from constant climbing. Her grip strength, when he tested it, was far above what he expected. Even her reflexes, dulled by injury, carried the sharpness of someone drilled in combat beyond the basic level. Something about her didn't fit. And when things don't fit, they usually mean secrets. On a scale of 1 to 10, how's the pain? 3, she said. Her ribs were swelling like balloons beneath her uniform. The tension in her jaw told him she was holding back more pain than most men could stand. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. If she wanted to hide it, there was a reason. He flipped the page of her chart. Previous injuries, hairline fractures, lacerations, and once knife wounds. Knife wounds? That alone set off alarms. Supply clerks didn't come back from the field with knife scars. Reeve leaned against the counter. "You've had some bad luck for a logistics specialist." Her eyes flicked up, sharp for the first time. Then, just as quickly, her expression smoothed over. "Accidents happen, Chief." He didn't buy it. He had interrogated insurgents with better poker faces. But this wasn't the field. This was an exam room. His job wasn't to dig, yet the questions pressed at the back of his throat. He changed tactics, casual conversation. "I noticed you tied that sling with your left hand. Not bad under stress. Where'd you learn to do that?" Her posture stiffened. For the first time, she hesitated. It was only a fraction of a second, but Reeves saw it. Soldiers trained in the ordinary way would have shrugged it, laughed it off, admitted someone showed them once. Elena's silence wasn't confusion.
It was calculation. He had hit something real, and she knew it. Reeve let the silence stretch. Years in the teams had taught him patience. He could wait out fear, anger, denial. But the way this young soldier guarded herself wasn't fear. It was discipline, the kind you only saw in operatives trained to live with secrets. Finally, she said, "I just pick things up quickly." Her voice was even, but her eyes had shifted away. Reeves smiled faintly. He wasn't convinced, but he didn't press yet. Instead, he adjusted her shoulder carefully, noting how she bit back the wince, how not a single sound escaped her lips. He had seen Rangers howl under less pressure. She just clenched her jaw and nodded for him to continue. "You're tougher than you look," he remarked. "I'm fine," she repeated, always the same words. But Reeves' instincts screamed otherwise. He could feel it in the way she moved, the way she answered. He wasn't treating a simple supply clerk. He was treating someone trained for far more than she admitted. As he finished wrapping the final bandage, he decided to test one more time. "You ever work with advanced trauma manuals? I thought I saw you reading one earlier in the waiting room." Her head snapped toward him. "I borrowed it. Too fast, too sharp." Reeve leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You don't need to lie to me, Specialist. I've been around enough operators to know when one's sitting in front of me." For the first time since she had walked in, Elena's mask cracked. Not fully, just a flicker, but it was enough. Her breathing hitched, her eyes widened, and she looked like someone who had just been cornered. And that was when Reeve knew. This wasn't just a soldier with bad luck. This was a soldier with a cover story. He finished taping her sling and stepped back, his tone calm but deliberate. "You don't have to say anything you're not allowed to, but if I'm going to treat you properly, I need to know what kind of training you've had. Otherwise, I'm treating the wrong patient." The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Elena stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. She had lived 3 years without slipping, without revealing anything. But this medic, with a single question, had pushed her closer to the edge than anyone else ever had. And now she had to decide, protect the program that doesn't exist, or protect herself. Elena Carter had been trained for this moment, or so she thought. Every briefing, every warning, every drill from the shadowy handlers who plucked her from obscurity had emphasized the same law: never break cover, not for anyone. If you're cornered, misdirect. If you're questioned, deflect. If you're caught, deny. The program's existence depended on silence, and silence had always been her strength.
But silence was harder under fluorescent lights, when a man like Daniel Reeve looked at you like he could read your pulse without touching your wrist. His voice wasn't harsh, not interrogative. That was the problem. He wasn't an enemy. He was a medic, a fellow soldier, someone who had seen too much to be fooled by rehearsed answers. Elena kept her eyes on the wall. "I don't know what you mean, Chief." Reeve didn't argue. He simply leaned back against the counter, folding his arms. He let the silence hang, the kind of silence that pressed down until even the strongest cracked. Most people rushed to fill it. Elena didn't. She had survived childhood by living in quiet. She had survived selection by learning to mask her breathing. She could outwait anyone. Or so she believed, because this silence wasn't just emptiness. It was a duel. Reeve broke it first, but not with accusation. "I once treated a ranger who swore he'd never been trained past basic. Said he didn't know anything about knots. Then I watched him tie a one-handed clove hitch in the dark, eyes closed. Funny thing, habits. They slip through when you're not watching." Elena's stomach tightened. He was baiting her,
testing for reaction. She forced her body still, but inside, alarmed screamed. She thought back to earlier, how she had retied her sling without thinking. Too much muscle memory, too clean, too practiced. Reeves' eyes narrowed, catching the microsecond of tension in her shoulders. "See," he said softly, "that's what I'm talking about." Her pulse hammered, but her face remained neutral. She couldn't let him know, not fully. Her mind flashed back to her handler's words before her assignment. "Your greatest weapon is invisibility. You're a ghost inside the system. Logistics is your cover, but your training is your edge. If anyone suspects, deny, deny, deny." She remembered the selection course, the endless nights under freezing rain, the way instructors stripped away everything until only willpower remained. She remembered the knots, the climbs, the survival drills, things no supply clerk should ever know. And she remembered the oath she took, secrecy above self. But now, secrecy was at war with survival. Because Reeve wasn't just any medic. He had clearance. She could tell by the way he referenced manuals he shouldn't have seen. He knew the questions to ask. And for the first time in years, Elena felt her armor crack, not from pain, but from recognition. Someone finally saw her. Reeve moved closer, lowering his voice. "I don't need your secrets. I need to keep you alive. Knife wounds, fractures, dislocations. Your body tells a different story than your file. If you keep lying, I can't treat the damage properly. That could end you in the field." Elena clenched her jaw. He was right, and that was the danger. A slip of truth might protect her health, but it could destroy the program. She exhaled slowly, choosing her words with care. "Sometimes training overlaps. Maybe I just practiced more than most." It was weak, and they both knew it. Reeve didn't call her out. Instead, he shifted tactics again. He tested her range of motion, pressed against her ribs, checked her grip. He instructed, "Squeeze." She did. His brow furrowed. Even injured, her grip strength nearly matched his. That wasn't normal. Not for her size, not for her role. He released her hand and studied her like she was a puzzle missing its corner pieces. Elena forced herself to look away, focusing on the parade ground outside the window. Soldiers moved in perfect formation, their boots striking rhythm on the asphalt. The rhythm comforted her. Order, structure, control. Everything she needed to stay hidden. But Reeve's voice pulled her back. "Where'd you learn to breathe through pain like that? Most soldiers scream before I set a shoulder." Her heart skipped. She had slipped again, too calm, too practiced. "I've had worse," she muttered. Reeve's eyes sharpened. "Worse? From resupplying crates?" The air thickened. Elena cursed herself. Words were knives and she had just cut too deep. She should have stuck to silence. For the first time since joining the program, Elena realized she might not be able to outweight this questioner. Not this time. Her ribs ached, her mind raced, and still Reeve waited, not with suspicion alone, but with something far more dangerous: patience. Elena Carter had survived 3 years by living inside her silence. Every mission, every cover story, every daily interaction on base had been practiced and polished until it was unshakable. She was logistics, nothing more, nothing less. And yet here she sat, with her ribs bound and her shoulder throbbing, facing a man who refused to accept the version of her written in ink. Chief Reeve didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam files on the table or accuse her of lying. He simply observed. That was worse. His questions were small, precise, almost casual, yet each one carved at the seams of her cover like a scalpel. You've had worse, he repeated softly, as if tasting the words she had let slip. Elena froze. She had spoken without thinking. That never happened, not to her. I meant training accidents, she corrected quickly. Reeve tilted his head, unconvinced. Maybe. But you know what I've noticed? Soldiers who hide their pain usually do it for pride, to look tough. Yours isn't pride. Yours is discipline. Different animal. His eyes lingered on hers, steady and unblinking. He wasn't interrogating. He was studying the way a field medic studies a battlefield before choosing where to step. And that was what rattled Elena most. He wasn't trying to break her. He was trying to understand her. She looked away, staring at the motivational poster on the wall. Pain is temporary. Honor is forever. The words felt hollow compared to the truth she carried. Pain wasn't temporary when you lived with it as a constant companion. Pain became habit. Pain became silence. Her handler's voice echoed in her mind. If anyone ever suspects, you disappear. You cut ties. You never, ever confirm anything. But disappearing wasn't an option here. She was injured, grounded, dependent on this medic's treatment. And for the first time, she wondered if protecting the program meant sacrificing herself. Reeve spoke again, gently. I'm not your enemy, Carter. If you're worried about clearance, I have more than you think. I've worked with units that don't exist on paper. I've treated people whose names never appear in rosters. I know the look when someone's carrying secrets too heavy for their size. Her pulse quickened. Was he bluffing? Or did he really know? She glanced at him, expecting judgment, but found something else. Recognition. That was more dangerous than suspicion. Recognition meant he had seen others like her. Recognition meant she wasn't invisible anymore. And for someone who had built her life on being unseen, being recognized felt like exposure and relief at the same time. She swallowed hard. With respect, Chief, you don't know me. No, he admitted, but I'd like to. Because if I don't, you're going to keep refusing treatment you actually need. And the next time you fall from 20 feet, you might not stand back up. The words hit like a strike. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Her ribs burned with every breath. Her shoulders screamed with each shift. But she had convinced herself she could push through. That was the lie she always told. She was fine. She was always fine. But she wasn't. Not anymore. For the first time in years, Elena felt the silence falter. She wanted, needed someone to see her, to know her. Her voice was quiet when it came, almost a whisper. It wasn't a training accident. Reeve's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move, didn't push. He simply waited. Elena closed her eyes. The memories flooded back unbidden. The black facility where she learned to tie knots under blindfold. The endless days of being broken down and rebuilt. The whispered orders from people whose names she never knew. Her mouth grew dry. She couldn't tell him everything, but she had already said too much. Reeve leaned forward, his tone calm but deliberate. Then what was it? Her eyes opened slowly, locking on his. For a moment the silence stretched again, her armor fighting to rebuild itself. But the words slipped out, ragged, heavy with truth. It was preparation. Preparation. The word slipped from Elena's lips before she could stop it. The moment it hung in the air, Her pulse spiked. It wasn't just a slip, it was betrayal. She had promised herself she would never give anyone more than a deflection. But now the truth had crept out in a single poisoned syllable. Chief Reeve didn't pounce on it. He didn't shout, didn't scribble notes, didn't call in officers. He just let it echo, watching her with a medic's patience. That was worse. Preparation, he repeated quietly, as if rolling it on his tongue. Preparation for what? Elena's throat tightened. She thought about lying, backtracking, burying the word under another excuse. But her silence betrayed her again. She stared at the wall, jaw clenched, and said nothing. Reeve exhaled slowly. You know, I've seen soldiers train for a lot of things. Basic, airborne, even ranger school. But none of them call it preparation. They call it training. They call it qualification. Preparation, that's something else. Her silence was giving him more answers than words ever could. She shifted on the exam table, ribs screaming with the movement. The pain reminded her of nights spent clawing through gravel, instructor screaming above her, forcing her body to endure past breaking. She remembered the ropes, the knots, the blindfolds, the fire and forget commands. It wasn't training in the normal sense. It was exactly what she had called it. Preparation. For missions she couldn't talk about. For a life that wasn't supposed to exist. But how much did he already know? Reeve leaned closer, lowering his voice. Tell me something, Carter. When you hit that ground, why was your first instinct to stand up? Most soldiers roll, cry out, grab for help. You... He paused, his eyes locking on hers. You got to your feet like you were checking who might be watching. Her breath caught. He wasn't guessing. He was dissecting her, piece by piece. It's instinct, she muttered finally. Instincts come from somewhere, he replied softly. Elena squeezed her eyes shut. She wanted to disappear back into silence. She wanted the armor to rebuild. But something about his tone, steady, not accusatory, pulled at her. For years she had carried the weight alone, and now, sitting broken in a sterile room, she felt the unbearable pull of being understood. It was dangerous. It was intoxicating. You ever heard of knots that don't exist in Army manuals? Reeve asked suddenly, catching her off guard. Her eyes snapped open. Why are you asking me that? Because, he said calmly, I saw the burns on your palms. That sling you tied, cleaner than most operators could do under stress. That's not Army. That's something else. Her chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to deny it, but her silence was louder than words. Reeve didn't press. He simply nodded, as if confirming something to himself. You don't have to tell me everything, but if you don't start telling me something, you're going to hurt yourself worse than you already have.
His words landed hard. He was right. Her body was failing. The injury wasn't just bone and muscle. There was more. Nerve damage. The kind of thing she couldn't explain without revealing the specialized gear she had been carrying. She had hidden it from every doctor so far. But if she hid it from him, it might end her career or her life. Her lips parted. Against every rule drilled into her, she let a fragment of truth escape. It wasn't a rope drill. Not really. Reeve's eyes didn't widen. He didn't act shocked. He simply absorbed it, like he'd been expecting it all along. What was it then? He asked gently. Elena hesitated. Her silence stretched long enough to suffocate. But finally, she gave him the smallest shard of her reality. It was part of a test. Reeve studied her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he nodded. I thought so. Her heart pounded. Thought so? What did he mean? He leaned in, his voice almost a whisper.
Carter, I've seen this before. Not here, not officially, but I've met others who carried the same look in their eyes, the same fractures in their bodies. They were part of programs no one admits exist. Her breath caught. She wanted to ask which program, how much he knew, what he had seen. But the rules screamed at her to stay silent. Reeve didn't need her answer. He could see it in her face. And in that moment, Elena realized the most dangerous thing of all. He wasn't guessing. He was recognizing. The word test still lingered in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Elena Carter sat motionless, her breath shallow, her ribs aching beneath the bandages. Every rule she had ever lived by screamed at her to retract, to bury what she had said, to pretend it had never slipped. And yet the silence between her and Chief Daniel Reeve was no longer the safe silence she knew. It was dangerous, heavy, exposing. Reeve didn't break it with accusation. He didn't snap at her or demand names. He simply studied her, calm and unflinching, as if he had already walked through 1,000 lies to reach this one truth. A test, he repeated quietly. Preparation for something that doesn't exist on paper. Her jaw tightened. She wanted to deny it, but her heart betrayed her with a hammering rhythm that even she could hear. "You don't know what you're asking," she said finally, her voice flat. Reeve leaned against the counter, arms folded. "I don't have to ask. I can see it. I've patched up operators from units no one admits exist. They carry the same look in their eyes you do, the same silence, the same scars."
Elena swallowed hard. His words cut deep because they were true. She remembered the first time an instructor had told her, "From this point on, you are invisible. Your life belongs to shadows. You will never be acknowledged, never be recognized, never be thanked." Back then, she thought she could handle it. Now, after years of living under the weight of secrets, she wasn't so sure. She looked down at her hands. The knuckles were raw, the skin toughened from years of rope burns and endless drills. No one in her logistics unit ever noticed because no one cared to look. But Reeve looked, and that was the danger, being seen. "I can't talk about it," she muttered. "I didn't ask you to," he replied evenly. "But I need to treat you like who you really are, not what your file says. If I don't, you'll never heal. And then the next fall, the next mission could finish you." His tone wasn't a threat. It was a lifeline. And that terrified her more than anger ever could. For the first time in years, Elena realized her silence might be killing her. She exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the floor. "It costs everything," she said, almost to herself. "They take you apart until there's nothing left but function. You stop being a person. You become a tool." Her voice cracked. The words felt foreign on her tongue. She had never admitted them aloud, not even in the dead of night. Reeve didn't look away. His expression carried no pity, only recognition. "I know that weight," he said softly. "Different mission, different training, same cage." Her eyes flicked up, surprised. In his gaze, she didn't see judgment. She saw someone who had lived his own version of the same silence. For years, she had carried the burden alone. Now, for the first time, someone was helping to shoulder it. Her throat ached. She wanted to retreat, to rebuild the mask. But when Reeve stepped closer and adjusted the sling around her arm, his touch was steady, professional, yet human. Not the cold efficiency of an instructor, not the distant detachment of a commander. Human. And that simple humanity cut deeper than any interrogation could. "You won't see your name in medals or in history books, but don't think for a second that makes your fight invisible. Some of us see it, some of us always will." Elena blinked hard, forcing back the burn in her eyes. She wasn't supposed to cry. She wasn't supposed to feel.
Yet here she was, cracking open under the weight of being understood. Her voice was ragged when it came. So what happens now? Reeve gave a faint, tired smile. Now you heal. And when the time comes, you decide if silence is still your armor or if it's become your prison. The words hit harder than any order she had ever received. Silence had saved her life, but it had also chained her to invisibility. For the first time, she wondered if survival alone was enough. The door opened suddenly. A nurse entered with a clipboard, breaking the fragile moment. Elena straightened instantly, the mask snapping back into place. The nurse saw only another soldier with bandages, but Reeve had seen beyond them. As the nurse left, Reeve packed away his tools and looked at her one last time. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't alone. She would return to her unit. She would continue the cover story. The program would remain in the shadows. But one man knew. One man had seen the truth she carried under the silence. And for Elena Carter, the quiet soldier no one noticed, that single recognition was enough to keep her standing when the weight of secrets threatened to crush her. Because sometimes the strongest battles are fought in silence, and sometimes the only victory is knowing someone finally hears it.